We will be talking about FreeStyle Libre and Dexcom CGMs today, and really everything you need to know about CGM, continuous glucose monitoring. We can also talk about some other systems if you want. If you have questions, sorry about that here, please give me a thumbs up just to let me know that you can hear me. I hope you can hear me. I will be checking in the chat. Once I get your feedback, I will get started here. But before I get to your questions about CGM, about FreeStyle Libre, about Dexcom and any other CGMs really, I just want to say one thing. Continuous glucose monitor, in my opinion, is the biggest invention in, thank you for the feedback, you can hear me, that's great. Continuous glucose monitor is the biggest invention in diabetes, in my opinion, since the invention of insulin. I really put continuous glucose monitoring place number 2. So insulin number 1 for those who need it, and continuous glucose monitoring number 2 invention of all times, because this really is something that changed my life, and not only because I have a YouTube channel about it, but also in terms of how I can manage my diabetes and how I can live my life with diabetes, how much better it got. And so obviously I'm biased. I love CGMs, I love all the systems that are out there, some of them more, some of them less. But I want to encourage you, if someone here is watching and doesn't yet have a CGM, doesn't yet have FreeStyle Libre or Dexcom, and is deciding, give it a try, because it really is a game changer. Now, I want to say, just before we get to your questions, and if you have questions about FreeStyle Libre, about Dexcom, drop them in the chat, please. I just want to cover some common questions that I often get about FreeStyle Libre and about Dexcom, and maybe a couple common mistakes that I think people make, especially when getting started, or when, the mistakes that are often reasons for people getting frustrated about their continuous glucose monitors. And so number 1, I think, is whenever someone gets a CGM and is a new user, they often get overwhelmed by seeing all the data, all the values, glucose values and glucose trends and graphs, basically 24/7, because we're not used to it. If we're not used to CGM, we're not used to seeing all the data. And we don't know of CGM, we see that every 5 minutes, and that often leads to people just trying to fix everything immediately and micromanaging and making just too many decisions right away, rather than just becoming students of what's happening to their blood sugar as they start using the continuous glucose monitor. So I would encourage everyone who is new to just use the system, try to learn at the first step before trying to make too many changes to what you are doing. Just learn what's really happening when you eat certain meal. Just learn what's happening when you go for a walk, how that impacts your glucose, what happens when you sleep, what happens when you get stressed. Because once you see that, it really gives you a lot of information, and then later on you can make changes to improve your glucose levels. We don't have to fix everything right away. People often also get frustrated about inaccuracy problems or their continuous glucose monitors. Especially I hear that with FreeStyle Libre are not giving them accurate glucose numbers, and people often compare those glucose numbers between the CGM and glucose meter. I just want to say these are not really things that necessarily always need to match. First of all, the method that continuous glucose monitors use, be it FreeStyle Libre, be it Dexcom, is they read glucose levels from interstitial fluid. This is a fluid between our blood vessels and cells. They don't read glucose directly from blood, which is what the standard old school glucose monitors do. and the interstitial fluid glucose is always lagging slightly behind the blood glucose. So in situations when blood glucose is rising fast or dropping fast, there will always be a difference between the sensor reading and the blood sugar meter reading, because they just use different methods. And that's normal. And so what I always say, or what I always focus on, is more the trends. Is my blood sugar going up? Is it going down? And is it going up steep, or is it just going up slowly? Because I really want my blood sugars to be in range, in the ideal range between 70 and 140 most of the time, and not moving too rapidly. I don't really care if it's 70 or 80. I don't necessarily compare that always to glucose meter. And so I always want to say this is a different method of measuring the glucose and doesn't always need to match. Another thing is that the blood glucose meter that you have at home also doesn't need to be 100% accurate. And so any kind of difference up to 20% between a continuous glucose monitor and the standard old school glucose monitor is kind of acceptable, and doesn't mean that there's a faulty sensor or there is necessarily a problem with the technology. This is something that I believe is important to understand, especially for those ones who are new. So I see some questions coming in the chat. So I'll try to go through the first round of questions. The first question came from Rajan. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Hi Tom, I recently finished trying out the Dexcom G7 and it changed my life with diabetes. Great. I'm so happy to hear that, because I had the exact same impression when I first started with a CGM. And Rajan is asking, however, I haven't tried the Libre 3 sensor yet, so I can't compare the two. Do you have any advice? I don't know if I necessarily have advice. I don't have any kind of advice in terms of medical advice, because I'm not a doctor. That's an important thing to say. I don't have advice necessarily, but what I have is a video on my YouTube channel where I do a detailed comparison of these two systems. I used both of them for a number of months, and I kind of compare the functionalities and how I felt about using them. I think Dexcom G7 is great. It's a great improvement from the G6. It still has little issues that connect the sensor and the receiver sometimes, and it also, the readings sometimes are jumping up and down a little bit. So I think the algorithm still needs some fine-tuning, but it's a great system. FreeStyle Libre 3 is very similar, but doesn't give you so many options in terms of the mobile app. So the mobile app on the Dexcom G7 is really gives you so many more options when it comes to alarm setting and different profiles. FreeStyle Libre 3 doesn't have that. But FreeStyle Libre 3 is smaller, and I really like it. So if you're happy with Dexcom G7, I don't think there is a reason for you to make a change. Of course, you can try FreeStyle Libre 3, but the systems are really, comparable. We can say they do basically the same thing. It's just about the functionalities. I think Dexcom G7 is a little bit more advanced. So for type 1 diabetics who are really into close control, maybe the G7 is better. And then there are many other things to consider, but maybe check out that video where I do detailed comparison, because this will give you really detailed information that I can't really pull out of the top of my head. So next question. So Justin says, as a totally blind person, the Dexcom G7 is game-changing. So that's great. I think, not sure if FreeStyle Libre gives you the option to have voice navigation or voice information. I'm really happy to hear that Dexcom G7 does it for you, and that it's a game changer for you. I'm so happy to hear that. Judy says, you are interesting. Okay, thanks. I take it as a compliment. Fernando, how do I try Dexcom if my insurance doesn't cover it? It's too expensive. Yes, sorry to hear that. I hope you can at least access FreeStyle Libre. As I said at the beginning, I think CGM is such a game-changing device for people living with diabetes, be it type 1 or type 2 diabetes or even pre-diabetes. And I would not be too frustrated that I cannot have Dexcom as long as I can have some other one. I think they are really comparable and yeah, just don't give up if you have access to something else. So someone is asking if all CGMs have insurance coverage. It really depends what country you are in, what insurance you have. I cannot give a response that would cover all countries. In general, most people in Europe who have type 1 have coverage. I believe also in the United States, if you have type 1, you would have coverage, and with type 2, for example, Medicare in the US covers FreeStyle Libre, and I believe now also Dexcom. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but it really depends by country, so I don't want to go too deep into that. Next question comes from Anita. Hi from Denmark. Hi to you. Do you know if the new Dexcom will talk to the tandem pump like the G6 does? Yes, the G7 will talk to the tandem pump. I believe it should happen later this year. I think there is a press release from Tandem. They are definitely working on it, and I think the estimated timeline is by the end of this year or early next year. I personally would stay with the G6 if you're a tandem pump user, and if you're using the closed loop system with the Dexcom G6 and tandem t:slim X2, I would stay with the G6. I think I have some issues here with connection. So I'll just repeat the question. I hope you can still hear me and see me. I have some issues with my internet connection here, for which I apologize. So British guy was asking about the insulin pump. So I tried tandem t:slim X2. I tried the Ipso pump from Switzerland, and then also newly I'm testing Omnipod 5. I like all three of them, and I've done a detailed review of the tandem t:slim X2. It is on my channel. It's a good pump. I think I liked the Ipso pump a little bit better. I also have a detailed review on my channel, and now I'm on Omnipod 5, which is a tubeless insulin pump. I'm still learning, and I will be definitely making also reviews on my channel. But all three of these pumps are good. Since you're asking good for you, all three I would take. If I couldn't choose between these three, I would take any of them and happily use it, because they all support the closed loop system, which for me is really important. Okay. So I'm looking for some more questions. Which CGM is better for looping, Libre 3 or Dexcom? I think for looping, right now, the best, or the one that you can loop with on most systems, is Dexcom G6. Is by far the widest integration with most of the pumps and most of the systems. So Dexcom G6 integrates with almost everything. FreeStyle Libre 3 in some countries in Europe now integrates with MyLife Ipso pump with CAM APS FX, and hopefully they will soon integrate with Tandem and at some point with Omnipod, and the same goes for the G7. But Dexcom G6 is the best for looping and for integration if you want to stick to commercial solutions. If you want to go to solutions like open loop, which are not commercial solutions, then you might be able to do that with other CGMs as well. Dexcom G7 has a long needle and it goes into my muscle. And I was wondering if Dexcom G7 has a smaller needle. So Dexcom G7 does have well, I don't know about the needle, but I know about the filament. The filament on the G7 is definitely shorter than the G6. What you could do potentially, or I've seen some skinny people are doing with Dexcom G6, when they insert the sensor, they put it on the skin, and then before they press the button to insert it, they pull out a little bit, pull back, while the adhesive is stuck to the skin, which causes the needle not to go too deep, and then they avoid hitting the muscle. I guess this is something you could try with the G6. The difference with the G7 is the G7 needle goes under 90-degree angle. The G6 needle goes under 45-degree angle. So there is a little bit of a difference. With the G7, the needle goes right in under 90-degree angle, just like FreeStyle Libre 3. I'm not sure about the needle size, which is what you were asking, but since the filament on the G7 is shorter than the filament on the G6, it might be that the needle is shorter as well. For a British guy is also asking which system is better for me, if Dexcom G6 or Dexcom G7. I mean, right now it's Dexcom G6, and the only reason is the integration with insulin pump. I'd say Dexcom G7 is better, although it has some little things that still need to be fine-tuned. It's a better system because it has more flexibility. You can do more with alarms. You can silence the alarms for a certain time. You can have two different alarm profiles. And it's also a lot smaller and just a lot more convenient to wear. So I would say, you know, if it could loop with the commercial systems, I would definitely say G7, but now I'm saying G6. So I'm getting a bit lost in the chat. I think the last one I answered was this one. So next one is from Slake Adventures. My son really struggles with surfing. We cannot find a solution to read his sugar in the ocean. Tried Apple Watch with Bluecon, etc. But seems too much obstacle like wetsuit, moving water, and so on. Any advice? Yeah, that's a tough one. I know, you know, when you're surfing, there is just so much movement, and as you said, wetsuit can be in the way. I don't have a good tip. I mean, the only thing I can think of is try to have the receiving device, whatever it is, as close to the sensor as possible, and in the light of in the same line of sight. So if the sensor is here on this, or here on this arm, I have it now on this arm, on back of the arm, I would try to have the receiving device, if it's a phone or insulin pump, or I don't know if you can actually do it with Apple Watch, direct to Apple Watch, I think doesn't work yet, but I would try to have it at the same side of my body, so maybe somewhere here, so there is not too much material in between the sensor and the receiver. Because if you have the sensor here and the phone on this side of the body, I don't even need to be surfing, and the signal sometimes doesn't go through. So try to have this in the same line of sight, meaning you can see the sensor and the receiving device at the same time. That usually means that there is not too much barrier in between them. I hope that helps, but other than that, I know surfing or any kind of this activity when you're actually wearing some wetsuit, it can get challenging. KSU 2009 is asking, do you know the size difference between Libre 14 Day and Dexcom G7? Is the G7 significantly larger than Libre 14 Day? Well, I don't know the exact difference, and I don't have the sensors here, but G7 is definitely smaller than Libre 14 Day. It's a bit smaller, and FreeStyle Libre is again a bit smaller than Dexcom G7. So Libre 14 Day is the biggest. It's about the size of US quarter. Dexcom G7 a little bit smaller. This is the G7. And Libre 3 again a bit smaller. When you look at my videos, where I compare the Dexcom G7, my videos about Dexcom G7, I think there you should be able to see how that compares to FreeStyle Libre. When you look at more videos where I compare different sensors, you should be able to get to a conclusion how much bigger it is. But it's not, G7 is definitely not bigger than FreeStyle Libre 14 Day, which is the oldest FreeStyle Libre version. A British guy is asking how to calibrate Dexcom properly. So again, I'm not a medical professional, but what I do is I follow guidance that's available online on Dexcom's website, and that guidance basically says you should only calibrate if the difference between your blood glucose meter and sensor is more than 20% during the time when the glucose is stable. So if your glucose is relatively stable, it's not moving up, showing 110, I would not calibrate, right? But if the difference was, let's say, 100 to 150, which is 50%, I probably would calibrate. I hope that helps. How is the Dexcom G7? It's really good. I made the Dexcom G7 review. It's on my channel, so there you can see all my observations. Two things I already mentioned are not so great. I think still requires some fine-tuning. Is it sometimes loses connection, and the readings are sometimes a bit jumping up and down. It's not significant, but it's just not as fluid as the G6 was. So there is still some fine-tuning needed, but it's really good otherwise. Geoelectric Universe says, I just wanted to thank you. I recently got diagnosed with type 2 and started using Libre 3. Thank you for your help and changed my lifestyle. You're welcome, and you're starting on Ozempic on Friday, so I'm curious to hear your experience, because I know this Ozempic drug is getting really, really popular in the US. So I'm sure you will like it. Paige, I'm new to insulin. Do I take before meals or after when I'm up? Well, first of all, you should talk to your doctor, and they should be able to give you specific guidance on how much medication you should take and when. In general, I believe that if you're taking short-acting insulin, usually people take it before the meal, sometimes even let's say 15 minutes before the meal. It really depends what type of insulin you have. But I don't know many people who would be taking insulin after the meal. When it comes to long-lasting insulin, if you have that, then the one is just typically injected once a day, and it's not that much dependent on meals. But if it's a pre-meal insulin, that's usually applied before meal. Barbara, I just started using CGM this year, 9.2 down to 6.2. I believe that's HbA1c. I like the Libre 3, but my pharmacy has problems getting them due back orders. Should I stay with the Libre 3 or switch to another sensor? I really don't know. I have no idea. I guess it again depends on the country or the region you are, you know, how long you would have to wait. Yeah, I'm sorry, I cannot really give you any good advice here. Okay, so I'm really behind in the chat. Sorry about that. Someone is asking about best pre-workout food for diabetics. I'm not going to go into that because this stream is really dedicated to CGMs. I can answer that during some other stream. So let's try to keep the topic on CGM. Paul is asking, did you have more accurate readings on the inside or outside of your upper arm with the FreeStyle Libre 2 sensor? I don't think I saw difference between inside and outside. For me, both worked just fine. So I can't really say. I know I heard, especially from people who are skinny, that they try to apply the sensor somewhere where there is at least a little bit of fat to that part of the upper arm. But for me, I don't really see difference when it comes to accuracy. Dragon Wind is asking, have you heard of anyone having their G7 unpaired by itself? No, I have not. That's an easy one. Darren, how reliable is X-Strip with Libre 2? I don't know. I don't use X-Strip. I know a lot of people use X-Strip Plus. I'm not sure if that's the one you're asking. And I just don't want to talk too much about these third-party solutions because I always expose myself to risk of video being removed when I talk about solutions that are not authorized, and I'm not sure if X-Strip is authorized by the regulators to be used with the Libre, so I don't want to go into that too much. Sorry about that, Darren. Michael is asking, I can't seem to find the video that I think you posted about this, but how do you avoid the 60-minute gap between sensor changes, Libre 3? With Libre 3, you cannot avoid the gap in the graph. You will always have a gap of at least 60 minutes. The one where you can avoid the gap completely is Dexcom G7. So with Dexcom G7, you can apply a new sensor while the old one is still running, and the warm-up starts running automatically, and then once 30 minutes passes, which is the warm-up for the G7 sensor, then you can just switch between the sensors and you have no gap. I'm making a video about that, but that's all Dexcom G7. You can't do this on FreeStyle Libre 3, unfortunately. But I still think that 1 hour gap is not too bad. Maybe I'll give one tip. What I do is I try to change my sensor when during the time when I know my glucose is not on the move up or down, when I'm kind of flat, plus minus, and I don't expect a big swings. So I know that during that 1 hour probably nothing will happen, and that's when I usually change my sensor. But it's not always possible, of course. We also need to live our lives, right? Next question, can we take off the Libre anytime we want when we are going to play sports or something? Well, you can take it off anytime you want, but once you take it off, you cannot put it back on. So once you peel off your sensor, the only way to get your readings is to apply a new one and start a new one. So I guess maybe the question is, maybe the response should be no. Although you're asking, can we take it off? Yes, you can, but you will lose the sensor. You cannot use it anymore. So if you want to be using it for a longer time, then you should not. Paige is asking, how do you stay motivated eating right? I would again just park this question for a different live stream where I want to talk about more about diet and blood sugar control in general. I really want to keep this CGM, so sorry about that. By the way, there is a way for you to reach out to me and ask any questions basically anytime on my Patreon. I have a small community on Patreon, and for my patrons I'm basically available usually within a few hours. I respond to all the questions they send me. Unfortunately, I cannot do it for all the YouTube comments, but Paige or anyone else, if you're interested in joining the Patreon, there I'm available basically all the time. And there is a $7 monthly subscription for Patreon. Link is in the video description if you're interested. Next question, how about using the reinforcement tape from the Dexcom on FreeStyle Libre 3? I mean, I guess you could do it. I haven't tried it. It might be a bit too big because Dexcom G7 is a bit bigger, but it might work. I don't really know, to be honest. Carol Davidson. I was diagnosed as type 1 at the end of March. Carol, again, this is not a CGM related question, so I'm going to skip this one. And I'm going to go to the next one. Type 1 for 30 years. Managing using MDI and FreeStyle Libre. Can you comment on best solution for delivering FreeStyle Libre to Apple Watch, minimizing third-party attachments? I saw Apple Watch with FreeStyle Libre 3. Actually, also with FreeStyle Libre 2 is alarms. So any kind of alarms come as a notification on the Apple Watch. That's one thing you can do. Unfortunately, you cannot see the readings all the time on your watch. For that, you need a third-party solution. I think the one that people like to use is Gluco. But again, I don't want to go too deep. Again, third-party solutions that are not approved by the regulators and manufacturers. But you might want to search for Gluco and see maybe that could do what you are looking for. Totally off topic, but I like your accent. Thank you. That is off topic, but thank you. Which shaver do you use? As a bald diabetic myself, this is totally off topic. I just shave myself with Gillette. Your buzz always looks pretty good. Thanks. Oh boy. So, is there any CGM related questions? Hi, just started with the G7. How long after insertion can it be calibrated to blood glucose reading? Well, it can be theoretically calibrated as early as when you get your first reading, which is after 30 minutes from application. I personally don't calibrate during the first few hours because what I've seen is that the Dexcom sensors tend to be a bit inaccurate for me during the first few hours, and so I don't calibrate them. And usually 6-8 hours after the application, the readings are actually perfectly on point. But you can calibrate whenever you want. Once you start getting the readings, you can calibrate. But I personally don't do it during the first few hours. Paige, I want to give a shout out to Eversense. I love it. G6 is hard for me. Yeah, thank you for mentioning Eversense. I personally don't have experience with it. I've always wanted to try it out, and I'm still in the process of getting one. I'm really happy to hear that you love it. If there is anything specifically that you love, feel free to share in the chat or in the comment sections for the others, because I really don't know that much about Eversense, or actually I know a lot about it, but I have no personal experience. And maybe for those watching, Eversense CGM is a CGM that's implanted under the skin, so it's not applied and removed after 2 weeks. It's implanted for 180 days, and it stays under the skin for such a long time. Still requires, I think, on-body transmitter. But Paige, feel free to share your observations, please. Liga is asking, do you use the logging feature on FreeStyle? Do you find it helpful for anything, or do you feel with using a pump no reason to log? I don't really use it. As you said, with the pump, a lot of things get logged on my pump. If I was a better, if I could exercise more self-control and more discipline, I probably would be taking some notes. I just can't make myself be so disciplined most of the time. I can see, the logging feature on FreeStyle Libre and also on Dexcom is really helpful, especially I believe for newly diagnosed who still need to figure out how things work, figure out different trends. I think it might be really beneficial for their healthcare professionals and for them actually, when they are looking at the data, to have some more information. What was happening during that time, what's causing blood glucose spikes, what's causing blood glucose drops. So I think this feature can be extremely helpful, because the more information we have, the better decisions we can make about. Good afternoon. Have you seen or used Dexcom One? No, I haven't. I think Dexcom One is a little bit. It's basically a downgraded version of Dexcom G6. The design is exactly the same, and they take away some of the features. For example, the integration with insulin pumps. So it's like a more simple Dexcom G6, but I haven't used it. Yeah, I don't really have any other tips for you on this question related to Dexcom One Libre 2 issues. I can't think of anything else. Is there an exact date when Dexcom G7 will be available for the T-Slim? No, there's no exact date. I think they just announced Q4 2023, if I'm not mistaken, but no exact date. These companies never give you an exact date. They never commit to anything, and that's always what people ask the most. So unfortunately, I don't have, and I will never have, any exact launch dates of any product. Sorry about that. Tell me what the G7 does and all of its features. You should definitely watch my review on my YouTube channel, where I have about a 15-minute videos where I tell you exactly that. So Paige is sharing some information about Eversense. Thank you very much. So what other questions we have? Dexcom Dexcom 6 sometimes gives me low readings when I'm not low, and it can scare my family. Any advice on this? I mean, if that happens for an extended period of time, you could calibrate, right? If you know that it's just constantly too low, you can calibrate. I guess that's one thing you can do. And in terms of scaring your family, I assume they follow you through the Follow app. I guess just let them know that you are still alive. I know it's not funny, but there's nothing else that comes to my mind, and I understand this can be annoying. So Barbara is asking, in a closed loop system, how do you handle the time after you start a new sensor when the readings are a little off? Actually, what I do is I turn off the auto mode. That's a great question, Barbara. So when I change my sensor and I know the readings are not accurate enough, I don't want to rely on the CGM data for my pump to dose insulin of inaccurate data. I don't want my pump to dose insulin of inaccurate data, and that's why I just turn off the auto mode. I go into manual mode, and then once I feel confident with the CGM readings, I go back to auto mode. Okay, what else we have here? What was the best single improvement from G6 to G7 after using it for a while? So I would say the best single improvement is the form factor. You know, it's just so much smaller. I think that's what I like the best. If I should say one, this is it. For multiple reasons, people can't really spot it easily. So what Dexcom did, they not only made it 60% smaller, but they also changed the color. And when I talked to the product team, they mentioned that they were really fine-tuning the color to the point where they wanted to find the color that blends the best with the skin, so that people can actually not see that in the room. You almost don't see the sensor. It's not like the G6 that pops out big time as a big bulky medical-looking item. The G7 is much more discreet. And so I really like that form factor, and not only because it's smaller, but also because of the material and the color used. It's really cool. Do you recommend a specific pump for a recently diagnosed 5-year-old? So this is not necessarily a CGM question, but I will. I would really like to help, but there is just so many things that go into this decision making, right? If you could give me some more information, like what is important for you and for your child, I could be of maybe better help. You know, Omnipod 5, you might want to consider if you are in the US. Because it's tubeless. I can imagine for a smaller child, a tubeless pump can be better, because they don't have to run around with the tube, and it just might be more convenient if they don't mind having the pod on their body basically 24/7. Another solution. Yeah, it really depends where you are and what your priorities are. It's really hard to answer, Jeremy. He uses a G6. If you are in the US, probably Omnipod 5. You can look at T-Slim also, but I think the algorithm in Omnipod 5 is probably better. Okay, so I was just diagnosed with type 1 a couple months ago, and I don't really know what calibration is. Sorry if it's a dumb question. No, it's not a dumb question at all. Calibration is basically a process or a step you can do with certain continuous glucose monitors where you can calibrate the readings, the glucose readings coming from the continuous glucose monitor. So let's say your continuous glucose monitor is telling you that your glucose is 100, but your glucose meter is telling you that your glucose is 200. So it's a significant difference between these two readings, and you just see this difference doesn't go away. It's still there. At that situation, you know, it might be smart to calibrate, meaning tell the CGM, you know, the glucose right now is not 100, but it's 200. So with Dexcom, you can do this. You can go in the app or in your controller and you click on calibration, and then you tell the system, now the glucose is 200. I want to calibrate to 200, and that system will take that information into the algorithm, and the algorithm will work with it, and that should help for the sensor to be more accurate going forward. So it's a bit difficult to explain. I hope I explained it well. What I was saying before was, you know, we don't want to calibrate when these differences are very small. I think it's only beneficial to calibrate when these differences are more significant. And the calibration process is something you can do with Dexcom, but you cannot do with FreeStyle Libre, for example. I should also say this is something you don't have to do because these sensors are calibrated in a factory. But if you see these inaccuracies as you use the sensors, then it might be helpful to calibrate with Dexcom. I hope that helps. Just Smile. That's a great nickname. Do you find G7 to be more accurate? No. No. More accurate than what? No, I mean not. No, I don't find it more accurate than the G6. I think it's about the same. And also when I tested it against FreeStyle Libre 3, I didn't really see it would be more accurate. I mean, I feel like the accuracy discussion is something that's like so overrated in the CGM space, because all these continuous glucose monitors on the market are extremely accurate. Like they all have accuracy within, I mean, absolute relative difference within 10%, right? So when they go through the clinical trials, the let's say average difference of CGM and laboratory readings is within 10%, which is nothing, right? If your blood sugar is 100 milligrams per deciliter, 10% would be between 90 and 110. And I don't really care if that sensor tells me I'm 95, if I'm 100. So I feel like the accuracy is really overrated. And if some system has a MART of 7% and some system has a MART of 8%, it doesn't really matter because you don't really see this kind of difference in real life. If the average difference was 50%, of course this would be a problem, but if it's 10 or 8 or 7, I don't care. So sorry, the question is, it's a valid question. G7, I don't find it to be more accurate. I just don't want to put too much emphasis on accuracy, because I feel like all these tools are accurate. I understand some people have a problem and for them they are not accurate because just not compatible. Some people are just not compatible with certain brands, with certain sensors, and that's a different discussion. But for the majority of people, these are extremely accurate, all of them. I'm gonna go to Miss Applesheep question, but before I do that, I want to ask you if you are getting value out of this video. If any of the things I'm sharing here are helpful, please hit that like button, because that helps this video to get to more people who might find it helpful as well. And if you have someone around you who might benefit from the information that's discussed here, feel free to share. That also helps this video to reach more people. And I'm now going to go to the question from Miss Applesheep. Hi Tom, any tips on Dexcom G6? I'm a new user, just switched from Libre 2. Go to my YouTube channel and watch all the videos about Dexcom G6. Specifically, there is one video that's called something like 33 tips for Dexcom G6 users. I think this might be what you are looking for. It's basically a compilation of all the tips and tricks videos I've done before on Dexcom G6. and that might be helpful. I would also say, and maybe I will repeat myself, but as a very new user, switching from FreeStyle Libre to Dexcom G6, you now have a continuous glucose monitor, which is a true continuous glucose monitor, right? So the Dexcom G6 shows you the glucose value all the time. Anytime you look at the app, anytime you look at the reader, you see the number. And you don't have that with Libre 2, because with Libre 2 you always need to scan to see the number. And sometimes when people see the number 24/7, they just start making much more adjustments in terms of what they do, how they eat, what medication they take, and they basically overreact to they just have too much information and they overreact. So my tip would be, don't go crazy about having more information at the beginning, and don't just make too quick decisions, especially when it comes to correcting high glucose, because sometimes we might overcorrect, and that might not be beneficial. But you probably know when you should correct and when not. Just wanted to say, more information can lead to more action, and not always it's not always helpful to be too proactive here. I'm not sure if what I said makes sense, but I hope it did. Delisa Taylor, and I'm sure if I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your names, because I feel like people here have some names that are easy to pronounce, like Jeremy, but Delisa, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Should this be Delisa or yeah, sorry about that. Anyway, Miss Taylor is asking, newly diagnosed type 2, which CGM do you think would be better one to use overall? The price with my insurance is the same for Libre 3 and G7. I think you cannot go wrong with any of them. They are very comparable because they are both continuous glucose monitors. Libre 3 is a little bit more simple tool, so it doesn't have that many different features in terms of alarms and in terms of different profiles and calibration, things like that. So G7 just has more functions you can use, which you might not need as a newly diagnosed type 2. Maybe you just want to be learning and actually observing what's happening, try to become a student of the glucose numbers, and maybe you don't need to have so many fancy tools that the G7 has. Maybe FreeStyle Libre 3 would be a more simple, easier to solution to use, but they are both quite simple. The one thing I want to say, if you are anyway, never mind. You are asking about Libre 3 and G7. I think both of them are good. Libre 3 might be a little bit more simple. G7 is more sophisticated. Okay. How often do you finger stick? I'm on MDI and my doctor wants me to finger stick before each shot. Do you have CGM? I mean, I'm not a doctor, so what I think is not really. You should not really listen to what I say, but I believe for anyone who has a CGM, finger sticking before every shot might be an overkill. I definitely don't do that. What I do is I have an insulin pump that's giving me insulin 24/7 basically. And this insulin pump fully relies on the data from the continuous glucose monitor. And I don't finger stick at all. I only finger stick when the way I feel is not reflective of the CGM number. So if the CGM is telling me I'm 60 or I'm 50, like I'm very, very low, but I'm not feeling low, then I will finger stick, and maybe I will see I'm not 50, I'm not 60, I'm maybe 100. Or when the CGM is telling me I'm 100, which is normal, but I feel like I'm very high, then I would also finger stick. But I don't finger stick unless I feel some weird physical symptoms. And I think, just doing it before every shot is a lot of finger pricking. Do you know if placing a CGM at somewhere specifically has more accuracy or has faster readings? For example, placing CGM on stomach or arm. So it doesn't matter. I mean, it's not faster, right? You can place it wherever you want. It will not be faster. It works at the same speed. But there has been a study done, for example, with FreeStyle Libre, where they were comparing upper arm with the thigh and with abdomen. I also have a video about that on my channel, where I compare some alternative sites for FreeStyle Libre. And I think they found out that arm was most accurate, thigh was the second most accurate, and abdomen was the least accurate for FreeStyle Libre. And I think it was one of the older FreeStyle Libre versions. But I think it's really it's a difficult one to answer. Some people have better results on a thigh, some people have better results on an arm, and then the most thing about FreeStyle Libre, for example, is not approved to be used on a stomach. Dexcom G6 I believe is, but G7 is not. That's for the arm. So yeah, it doesn't mean that it doesn't give you any data. I mean, I used it on all different sites, but it's very individual in terms of which site is more accurate for which user, I would say. Exactly as Roy says, there is difference between different people. Thank you, Roy, for giving a very simple response, because mine was way too complicated. But you are exactly on point. Can you please spell the product name you mentioned for Apple Watch, please, and thanks. I will write it in the chat. And I'm not sure if I'm spelling it right, but I tried my best. My reply made great sense. Thank you, Miss Apple Sheep. That's so nice of you to say. All right, I made it through all the questions. Unbelievable. Guys, oh yeah, I did. So if you have more questions, write in the chat. I think I can go a little bit longer, but if there are no questions, that's fine too. One thing I wanted to say is I just released, and maybe for those who are kind of new to CGM space and who are maybe getting with the CGM, getting started, I just released a video last weekend comparing Libre 3 with Libre 2 and some of the older Libre models. So if you are, for example, deciding between Libre 2 and Libre 3, that might be a good video for you to look at. And there is also a video I did on specifically comparing Libre 3 with Dexcom G7 a little bit earlier on my channel. Might be helpful for those who are deciding between these two. And of course, if you want some kind of more personal consultation or something, you can reach me on Patreon. You can send me a message there. I always respond quite fast. I also do coaching, so if you feel like you would want to talk about something CGM related or anything else, diabetes related, you want me to share my experience with certain topics or questions, it's also possible to book a 45-minute or 90-minute session with me. I have links in the video descriptions. So if that's something you feel like might be beneficial, feel free to do that. And in the meantime, I have some more questions. Christopher is asking, hi, any advice on 780G versus T-Slim? I mean, 780G I have not used personally. I am actually going to test it, most likely. I don't have high expectations. I know not many people are big fans of this system. I think T-Slim is a better system, if you ask me. And I think there might be even better systems than T-Slim, like the Omnipod 5 or Cam APS or MyLife Loop, which is not in the US but is in Europe. What I'm saying is just like my how I feel about this. I haven't personally tested 780G. Okay. Vegas Planner Girl, can you take a screenshot of the Apple Watch app? I'm searching and I can't find. I can't take a screenshot, or I can try if you give me a minute. I think I spelled it right. I will put a link in the chat. Where is the chat? We're here. Boom. So I put a link in the chat, which is to their website, and I believe you should be able to find it there. I hope this will help. Sorry, I'm on a live stream, so I can't really search for it because other people would probably get bored. But that's the one. Next question. Hi, what is really good time in range value, and can you leak your 90 days value? What should you have to avoid long-term complications? I mean, the official recommendation of the American Diabetes Association, I believe, is in terms of time in range, is 70% in range. 70% is something that I believe is achievable for most people. Not everyone achieves that, though. I can leak. You mean share mine? I'm usually in the 90s, but I don't want anyone who is listening to compare with me, because I have really good tools that that can keep me there. I have the closed loop. I have a CGM all the time. I have insulin pump all the time. I have a relatively flexible job where I can really focus on my numbers and managing diabetes. And I think in my situation, it's not that difficult to be in the 90s or even around 95% when I really focus on it. But I know in my previous job, I would never be able to do this, especially without the tools that are relatively new. So 70% is what is recommended. I personally want to be at least 85–90% because I want to avoid long-term complications. What I also need to take into account that I'm 38 years old. I was diagnosed with diabetes type 1 at the age of 3. So I already lived 35 years with diabetes. And during the first 25 years, I have no CGM, none of the tools I have right now. And I'm sure my time in range was terrible during that time. I'm sure it was not in the 90s, it was not in the 70s, it was not even in the 50s, probably. I can imagine, because when I remember what I did during that time, when I was a teenager or my early 20s, I really, my values were terrible. So right now I don't have any complications yet. that would be impacting me like my day-to-day life, but I'm really putting a lot of efforts into having very close control, because I know I probably already done a lot of damage in the past that I cannot remove. It's there somewhere. So I'm really putting a lot of efforts, and I'm really in my in the 90s with my time in range. And time in range, I mean, when I talk about time in range, I mean when my glucose is between 70 and 180 milligrams per deciliter, or between 4 millimole and 10 millimole in the per liter. So I hope that helps. Okay, perfect. So I went through all the questions, and there is one more. Should I always calibrate or check with finger pokes because the CGM isn't always accurate? Yeah, I mean, as I said at the beginning, I mean, it's not always helpful to compare glucose meter readings with the sensor readings all the time for every reading. I mean, if you do it once and you're off by more than 20%, it doesn't mean that you should calibrate right away, because I think it's important also when you do it, and the only time when I calibrate is when I am flat. So when my is not going up or down too much, when it's more or less flat, and then when I see differences repeatedly between my sensor reading and blood sugar meter reading, then I will calibrate, only when the difference is between 20%. But I don't calibrate every time. To give you an idea, I will calibrate once in 2 weeks or once in a month on average. I don't calibrate daily, I don't calibrate every 3 days. I really calibrate quite rarely. All right, making sure much area. Are non-official apps for CGM like Xtrip good or bad? I mean, they are, I believe, extremely beneficial for some people. It really depends. I think it doesn't hurt to explore that area if it interests you. For most people, this is not that interesting because it requires a lot of work and sometimes a lot of efforts to make it work. These non-official apps, and to integrate them and to connect them and then to use the data. Plus, it's not officially approved by the regulators, but some people have great benefits from using them because they just allow them to do more things that are not possible in the official apps. So if they are good or bad, I guess they are good for some people. They are not so great for some other people. I feel this is a really weak response, but I don't know what. This is like a black and white, good or bad. It depends. Do I calibrate a Libre 3? No, you can't calibrate Libre 3. You can only calibrate Dexcom. FreeStyle Libre, you can't calibrate. Hello from Canada, Sebastian. Hey, Sebastian. Hello from Switzerland. I'm actually about to end this live stream. So, Sebastian, if you just joined, I'm really sorry. But you can watch the replay if you want. And if you have any questions, hopefully you will make it to the next stream. Thank you everyone for joining. If you got value from this live stream, please hit that like button and share it with anyone who might get value too. And if you want to connect with me on Patreon or through a coaching session, there are links down below you can use. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Ciao! I never know how to